the world's writers will walk through those gates. And if you hang around, you get a chance to talk to them.
I'm interested in conversations that deal with things that matter, that real, how do we live our lives?
First of all, make climate change personal in your life. The second step is get angry and get active. And the third step, and believe it or not, I think this is the most important. We have to imagine this world that we want to hurry towards.
It's about kindness is looking at people as people and not as I voted this, I do this, whatever it is. There's some people we will never get along with, but most of us are a complex mass of different things.
Hello, I'm Ian Rankin. I've been with the Edinburgh International Book Festival basically since day one. I went as a student, as a reader, as a fan of writing. Later on, I was invited to go as an author, which was a thrill. And it's a spectacular experience. It's a meeting of minds. It's a way to open your mind to new experiences, to new ideas, nuanced debate, entertainment, something for every age group. And that's what keeps me going back year after year after year. Long may it continue.
Hello and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival for this event, which has been made in association with the British Council. My name is Fiammetta Rocco. I'm the Chief Culture Writer at The Economist, and I also run the International Booker Prize for Fiction. It's my very great pleasure today to be here with Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, a writer whom I have admired from afar for a long time and long wanted to talk to. She is a novelist, an essayist, short story writer, a teacher, a huge enthusiast for reading and for writing, and known by her fans around the world as the international superstar of Ugandan literature. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Fiammetta. Thank you for having me.
You've had some pretty busy weeks. It's just been announced that your short story collection, Manchester Happened, is on the long list for the Edinburgh Short Story Prize. It was already up for the Hearst Big Book Award, so many congratulations to that. And then in October comes your new book, The First Woman. Coming out into the spotlight is always a very strange time for a writer who sort of lives in lockdown anyway in their study. But how have the last few months been for you?
Well, the last month has been quite busy, putting aside the lockdown. One, because of course, what you said, the announcement of the Edinburgh long list, that was pretty exciting and so unexpected. And then, of course, having the novel, First Woman, come out both in the US and in Britain. And having to do all the interviews and the promotion online. So I've been pretty busy.
Well, this is a book that's been a long time in the making, a long time, in fact. And it's turned into an extraordinary multi-generational epic about identity, family, family secrets, about the lives of men, and especially, of course, the lives of women. Tell us a little bit about how the book came into being and what happened along this incredibly long journey.
Well, actually, the book came into being a long time ago, longer than the 20 years I'm talking about, because I started writing it in 1998. And at that time, I was teaching in an international school in Uganda, and the headmaster, who was British and came from Kent, had started to live in one of the rural areas in part of Uganda, and he was surprised, apparently, the Ugandans were waking up very early in the morning and they were either going off to work in their gardens or in their offices. And I remember him saying to me, Jennifer, I'm surprised. People in England apparently have been told that Africans don't work, that you just sit here waiting for aid. But I'm surprised everybody is so busy rushing off to work. And of course, it didn't make sense to me. But he said, you need to write. You need to tell the world that Africans work hard. And you can imagine how anyone could write to the world about that. I mean, I didn't know I can't write about Africa, let alone write the whole of Uganda, even the little space I occupy. But nonetheless, I started writing, and this is the kind of story that came out. And I wrote it, I think, for a month, and I wrote quite compulsively. But then I read back what I had written, and it just read like drivel, and I threw it away. But a friend of mine who was working on her keyboard skills at the time asked me for the book to put it on a floppy. At the time, there were floppies. And
That just shows you how long ago we're talking about.
I know,
Floppy.
ridiculous. As she typed it, she came back to me and said, I love the book. Can you write a little bit more? And I did. But then later, as we were talking about literature, she told me that she had read Animal Farm in her O-levels. And she told me that that's the book about the French Revolution. I think she had connected Napoleon to the French Napoleon.
Yeah.
And from that moment, I just said, if she told me my book is good, and that's her way of reading literature, I can't trust her. So I threw it away entirely. But then the same friend came to Manchester and was doing her MA. And she saw the writing school and she thought, oh, Jennifer would do very well. So she enlisted me and asked for the school to write to me. And I did an interview. And in 2001, I came and started to do my MA. And I wrote this book. I completed it in 2003 for my MA. And I passed very well, but it was rejected. And I tried again in 2005 after rewriting it, but it was rejected again. I tried again in 2008 after rewriting it again, and it was rejected. At that point, I thought, forget it.
Wow.
Then I started
what perseverance. That's amazing. I'm interested in how heroines force themselves into the reader's consciousness, because that is exactly what you've done. Your book has an extraordinary heroine, Kirabo. She is strong, she's ambitious, clear-eyed, and she's extraordinarily human as she comes to understand her place in the world and where she's going. She's as intelligent as Jane Eyre or Dorothea Brooke, and for me, she was as fierce of any of the women in Elena Ferrante's novels. Tell us in all this long process about the making of Kirabo.
Well, Kirabo was the very first character that I came up with. And I could see her. I could see she was very dark. I could see she had large eyes. I could see she was skinny and had very long, skinny legs. And she was impetuous and in a rush and impatient. But I can tell you that she has grown on me as well. The girl that I end up with at the end of this book is not necessarily the one I started with when I first started writing. It's mostly those events and those moments in her life and things that happened to her that formed who she was more than what I intended her to be. So there's one thing that I want a character who's like this and like that and like that. But there's also the character that develops out of the journey that I put her through. So in a way, she surprised me. She surprised me the way she surprises her mentor, Nsota, because I thought she was going to rip the patriarchy down and do this and do that. But she was more, she negotiated her life, she negotiated her event, she negotiated her world very carefully, because as she goes along and realizes the mother is absent and is not coming very soon, and the dad is available, but he's not really available, she starts to, you know, adjust who she is. And I could not have planned all of that.
So she's the first woman in some ways, but in lots of ways, of course, she's not, because there are older women in the book of her. But that is the book's title, The First Woman. And of course, it makes you think of Eve.
Yes.
How, in what way was this foundational myth, Eve, important to you in the writing of it?
Well, it's because I wrote Kintu, who is the first man.
Yes.
And I'm a feminist.
That was your second book, but your first book to be published.
Yes, but this was supposed to be about Nambi, who is the Eve figure in Uganda. And Kirabo in the beginning was called Nambi, actually. But as I went along, and because by then Kintu had been published, I was so desperate to have Kirabo, rather than Nambi, have that same stature as a character, being epic. And for some reason, Kirabo did not carry that weight for me, that is very traditional, that is steeped in the myth itself, because of course the myth is compromises the woman, and that makes it very difficult for me to write her. So in Adam and Eve, you have an Eve who tempted Adam to eat the forbidden fruit, and that leads to them being banished from Eden. In Uganda, we have Nambi, who is told by her father, after she marries Kintu, that you need to go to earth quietly in the middle of the night before your brother Death wakes up. Okay, but Nambi forgets to bring the chickens food, so she sends Kintu back, who unfortunately comes back with Nambi's brother, who's Death, and this is how Death arrives onto Earth. So that feminine guilt for me, I couldn't find a way to twist it around Kirabo or any of my main characters the way I did with Kintu. So in the end, I decided Kirabo to be unencumbered by being the specific first woman. And I decided to focus on the idea that, yes, Nambi was the bringer of death, because this is an idea that we tend to forget culturally when we talk about Nambi. Mm-hmm. If we, as Baganda, when we talk about Nambi, we talk about her as the mother of the nation, or sometimes as the grandmother of the nation. She is revered and she's perfect. And we tend to forget the way the myth had crafted her as the bringer of death. So for me, in my feminist intentions, I decided to create another Nambi who is a stepmother, and then who carries that burden of feminine guilt.
Well, that's so interesting. So, of course, the Ugandan setting, Baganda setting, as you say, is very important. The book is set in 1970s Uganda, yes, against the backdrop of Idi Amin, against the backdrop of the war with Tanzania. And there's a lot of that you could have made very heavy weather of that sort of political aspect of it. But you've crafted a political novel that's gone in a completely different direction, and a rather unexpected political novel. It's one about feminism, and I get the sense that you want to say something about the trajectory of feminism in Africa, although you never posit it as being in opposition to feminism in the West. It is clearly very different.
It is. Now, I'll talk about the political aspects of the novel. You see, with Idi Amin, Idi Amin is big, he's huge. He was big as a person, he had a larger than life character, but also as a literary character. I mean, you put him in your text and he will take over. He is that big, so you need to manage him. But because Kirabo is a child, and in culture, children are totally locked out of political discussions or political awareness unless it really touches her physically, like it does when she goes to the city. So that way, I'm able to leave out Idi Amin, but there are the repercussions. You can see them. So you can see Kirabo realizing the experiences of the expelled Asians and the fact that they were living in their houses. Kirabo is aware of the girls at school whose fathers are politically murdered. So that is, it happens naturally, rather than me going out to look for Idi Amin and what he did and talking about him. But I leave it at Kirabo's level because she's a child, and that helps me handle it very well. But when it comes to feminist African traditional thought, I wanted to look at, and specifically perhaps talk to Ugandans, because whenever you talk about feminism in Uganda, they say, oh, that is not our culture. It came from the West, it's come to destroy our culture. And we were not making any headways. And I thought, okay, to imagine that feminism came in the West is to imagine that women in Uganda who were oppressed by the patriarchy were incapable of thinking about it or coming up with ways to manage it. And so I decided to go back into oral traditions and find how stories where our grandmothers and our female ancestors must have recorded their experiences. Because with oral traditions, whether they are myth or legends or folk tales or fairy tales as you have here in the West, they are coded. All you have to do is to decode them. And so I went back and unearthed ideas that my ancestors had come up with. And this was specifically to say to Ugandans that there was feminist or traditional feminist thought here, but it hadn't been written. It doesn't have theories. It doesn't have regions the way we have French feminism, Black feminism, American feminism, or European feminism. But it was here. And I also wanted to say to the West that Africans obviously had feminist thought, but it was fragmented, it was limited to areas. But when Western feminism arrived, it arrived with such muscle that it overran and overwrote all the ideas that were developing. And this is me pulling them out and unpicking them for Ugandan readers, for African readers, but for the West as well. Because you know what? I believe that right now we need all the knowledges from all over the world. And I believe that if I can put Uganda feminist thought out there, there will be other feminist thoughts coming from everywhere else. And I think this will make feminism stronger. But I had no intentions of putting it in contention with contemporary feminism, because I believe
So one of the things that's so
working
interesting
together.
about it is the way that you use time.
Yes.
So the first big chunk of the book is Kirabo's childhood. And it's unusual to find a writer who is writing an adult contemporary novel in which so much effort is made to recreate a child's world. Often, you know, these things are done in very hurry or they're very cliched, but Kirabo's world that you've created for her as a child is incredibly well imagined. And then we go back 40 years to the 1930s, and then the story goes forward again. And in that going back, it's not just that it's in the service of the plot, which it is, but much more importantly, the feeling that I got was that you took us back to a very different Uganda.
Yes.
Is that part of what you're talking about? That's the way that you could access tradition, that you could access oral history, that you could tap into a world that had changed.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right, because Nsuta in this book is the feminist well that is teaching and grooming Kirabo for her adult life. But then Nsuta also had a childhood, and he also had grandmothers, and it was those grandmothers who were living a life in captivity, who prepared her, who told her about how women came to be subjugated, how children came to belong to men, even though, as they say, children grow in our stomachs. So it was very important for me to follow this thread of feminism. It didn't start with Nsuta. It didn't start with Kirabo. It started with Nsuta's grandmothers, and who knows where they found those ideas. So it's not me just using the folk tales, but it's this thread from grandchild to grandmother, back to grandmother's grandmothers as well, and getting all of it. But it also, I wanted also to talk about African childhoods. You know, you see Chirabo's childhood and you think, okay, she's living in the 70s and, perhaps this is a better time. But then let's go back to the 1930s and meet girls who were born in 1920s and how they're being brought up and how they are living their childhood. And this is in competition with the images of African childhoods that I've found in the West, of children who are emaciated with flies and dying. And I wanted to say that yes, war happens, and yes, drought and famine happens, but that's not the picture of African childhood. That is the rare aspect. Naturally, we don't look like that. But in all their wonderful intentions, the charity organizations do create this terrible, terrible outlook on Africa that we Africans tend to look at and think, what is going on here?
Because this is a child who is brought up by grandparents, hugely loved, hugely surrounded by siblings. Mother may not be there and the father is a little bit feckless. I want to come on to men in a second, but this is a very loved child.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had no intentions of creating a perfect childhood. I don't do perfection and I don't know how to do that. But this is a child who is being brought up by a grandmother and a grandfather. But around her are all the siblings to her dad, because her dad had her when he was very young. So he handed him, the child over to mom and dad, like boys do. And there's a whole village that loves this child, but not just that. There's an aunt who comes from the city and brings her everything she wants. I just wanted to say that, yeah, mom and dad might not be there, but you know, when she thinks about it, she's thinking because no one has loved my story. You know, that's when she misses her mom. As for her dad, she never misses, she doesn't even think about him.
So what about the men in her life? Because you may not do perfection, but you certainly do subversiveness. So you have about the patriarchy and the powerful men and everything, but the men you've created in Kirabo's life are pretty feckless. They're not really there. They're pretty irresponsible, self-centered, grumpy. Tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do with these men.
The most important man for me in the book is Kirabo's grandfather.
Yes.
And his role...
As he is for her, of course.
Yeah. He is there to love her. But, and again, this is the nature of grandparenting in Uganda, because what grandparents say is that I brought up my children to be strong and hardy and wonderful. My grandchildren, I am there to just enjoy and spoil them. So this is where her grandfather is coming from. Her grandmother is more strict because she's a woman. She knows the life of a woman, and she's frightened that if Kirabo is spoiled, then she won't be prepared for the tough life of a woman. But her grandfather is just enjoying himself, you know, and he, in a way, he is a feminist, her grandfather, as far as his daughters are concerned. His wife is a different case, but his daughters, he must prepare them for the tough world, and they must get an education, and he must fight for them to get a little bit of his property, because the law is against it, because he doesn't want his daughters to fall into poverty, and he doesn't want his daughters to remain in bad marriages. And it is true of most of the men, even the Kirabo's grandfather from the mom's side, who is an absolutely terrible person. When it comes to his daughters, he is different. You know, men should not abuse his daughters, but he has been abusing his wife for a very long time, you know. And again, Kirabo's father worships her. But for him, the world is changing. So his wife is not allowing him to misbehave, you know. And of course, that's where the conflict comes from, because Kirabo is just expects her father to love her, but there are things bigger than her that her stepmother is dealing with.
I want to ask you a little bit about how you use language, because it's a very onomatopoeic novel. You know, you could read it out loud. You create a world full of sounds of rain falling on corrugated iron roof, the sound of the night, and you use English, or these different Englishes, and also your own Luganda. So it's all mixed up to great effect. And when you talk about, for example, the mafuta mingi, which literally means very fat, but has come to denote a certain kind of prosperous businessman, you mix all this language up and there's no italics. So tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced as a writer in importing linguistic effects and jokes. How do you know how these will work on readers who are not familiar with Luganda and may never have traveled to Africa at all?
Here's the thing. Perhaps Luganda is an onomatopoeic, but also I first found stories orally. So I first told stories orally, and there's always that oral element to my stories, to my novels. and it's important to me. But also I use Ugandan English. We call it Uglish, you know, because sometimes
Uglish, give us an example of Uglish. This is a language I want to learn.
what can so sometimes we say in Uganda, we have a saying in Uganda that what money touches, it makes soft. Okay, but what we say, money beats, money gonza. Gonza is to make soft, but money beats, you know, that is English. Money is English too, but gonza is Luganda, and totally just one word of Luganda takes the whole meaning away from English. Okay, and this English works with us because we can't speak the English that was brought to us at colonial time. So this language has been brought to us, and we are using it to communicate not only amongst ourselves in Uganda, because we speak so many different languages, but we use it to communicate amongst ourselves in Africa. But it's not going to be, as Achebe said, it's not going to be the standard English. So I bring that English in the text because often when I try to translate something from Luganda into English, it dies. And there are moments when I have to leave a word in Luganda because the English equivalent is not as good. But often I try to explain the meaning within the context of the sentence or the sentence after, so that the reader who's not a Muganda can understand. Because remember, it's not only the British or the Americans who may not understand, it's some other Ugandans too, who don't speak my language. It's other Africans as well who don't speak my Uganda language. So I try as much as to gloss within the text.
So water's a very, very big thing in your book. You have the pregnant woman who gives birth to water instead of a child. You have the couple who are flirting around the well with the carrying of the debe full of water on your head. He fills up the debe from the well and then puts it on her head. You have this extraordinary long passage in the final 9 or 10 pages of the book where there's an incredibly important scene in the rain. You have these female spirits that live in rivers and lakes and only come out at night to tempt men. Actually, do you know, now that I come to think of it, we have those in Scotland as well. They're called selkies. So your mujini are Ugandan selkies. They are tempters that come out of the water. Tell us about why water is so important to you and what it signifies, particularly in Uganda.
I mean, water is always presented as a woman's realm. Not just because traditional women fetch water, but also traditionally all water bodies belong to female spirits and goddesses. And there's a way that we relate. I don't know about you, but one of my most remembered moments of childhood is going to bed, and then you have a thunderstorm outside, and the rain on the corrugated iron, you know, so loud. It just such a fantastic feeling that sometimes when I came out here in Britain and it would rain and I would not hear the rain on the roof, I would be like, whoa, is it really raining? Because I'm supposed to hear the noise. And so we, perhaps that kind of childhood, that kind of being very close to water as a girl, collecting it from the well, perhaps led it to being so important in my text. But I was quickly aware that throughout most of the oral traditions, the stories about women, women are located in water, women came out of water. They are always creeping out of the water and coming to up to no good uh, among the the living. And so for me, it was not very difficult to locate the first woman to come from water and to allocate all the water bodies on earth to women, and then connect that to the refusal to have women owning property.
Okay, so that's all connected.
It is
and
connected.
Of course, because it's Uganda, the heart of the Nile, within the continent, Uganda as the source of African water is such an important.
It is, and you can see that most of those the women are presumed to come out of the Nile, but also that woman who had a son who was not performing proper masculinities, he was taken to the Nile and dipped in. There's that sense of, water is very, very important. In Uganda, we perceive it as water is life, and everything, every part of our life is involved with water. But I guess perhaps this is where it's linked with the women, because the women are the custodians of culture and women are the custodians of human life, perhaps.
Jennifer, would you read from your book? I think our audience should have a direct sense of what it feels like to read this literature.
Absolutely. So I'm going to read from the first part of the book, when Kirabo comes across one of the streams in her village. So she came to the Nancha, a stream which formed the border between Nateta and Chisoga. Because Nancha, the spirit who owned the stream, was a clanswoman, Kirabo walked to the bank to say hello. The stream was silent, as if still. Yet tiny fish wriggled against the floor. They were so transparent she could see their spines. Kirabo shut out the rest of the world to hear Nancha flow. Water made irate noises where stones or plants stood in its way. It sucked its teeth when there was a dip in the gradient. Something hidden under the silt blew bubbles to the surface. Tadpoles, probably. For a while, Kirabo listened to the stream. Then she jumped in and made a splash. Fish vanished, water muddied. Her feet sang at the cooling effect. After a while, she stepped out on the stones and skipped from one to another until she reached the other side. She said, "See you," to Nancha and carried on.
Oh. So you can see why the first woman comes with plaudits, and it comes with plaudits particularly from Maza Mengistu, whose new book, The Shadow King, was just longlisted for the Booker Prize, from Namwali Serpell, whose book, The Old Drift, was very widely praised last year. She's just announced that she's been made a full professor at Harvard starting in 2021. Maza Mengistu from Ethiopia, Namwali Serpell from Zambia, you from Uganda, Jennifer. You're an amazing generation. I mean, the generation that Margaret Busby calls the new daughters of Africa. What has brought forth this extraordinary generation of writers, this golden age of writing from Africa, especially by women? What do you think lies behind this?
You know what? Every time we sit together as African writers, especially women, we wonder what is going on. And, you know, there was that first wave of what people we call, some of us call them our mothers, other people call them the grandmothers, the Miriam Abba, Buche Mecheta, Flora Nwapa, Amata Edu, who wrote against everything because they were ignored by fellow African male writers in the beginning, and they were ignored by everybody, but they went out and tried their hardest. And we tend to look at them as the people, as the women who got the machetes and went to the forest and cut out a trail.
Yes, Bessie Head, for example.
Yes,
Exactly.
and we tend to say that there was a second wave of women writer who came in the 80s, like Tsitsi, Dangarembga, you know.
Also just long-listed for the Booker.
Absolutely. There was also other writers from South Africa and Zimbabwe and Nigeria. And then came this new crop of authors. But we all imagine that the first two waves cleared the path. But it all comes from a culture where women had been put back. We had all been brought up on male texts of Chinua Achebe Ngugi and all the other male writers that whose books were distributed in schools around Africa, mainly the Heinemann generation. And of course, as a girl, as you read these books, you're wondering what is going on, where are the girls? And you're dreaming, if I ever get a chance, I would write the kind of girl that I know, and I would make the world of women, the center of the world. And I imagine that all of us, all over Africa, were thinking this, we're dreaming about this, and we were thinking we're going to do a good job of it. And here we are. But I think it's because we came from a very repressed background, and we saw our foremothers who first wrote how they were treated, and we decided we're going to go all the way.
So one of the things that they've done, or you've done, and I feel incredibly strongly about this, but is to show what a force for good reading is. I mean, book prizes, festivals like this, you know, it's easy to think that they might be for writers, but in fact, they're really for readers. It's the readers who are the great winners of these things. These are the places that you go to find great stuff to read. And reading is one of the things that human beings can do that puts them completely in somebody else's shoes. I mean, that's what I mean about reading being a force for good. So tell us what you've been reading and tell us what you would like us to read.
Indeed, what you say is correct. I've always looked at reading because I grew up in Africa and I've been reading in Africa, but that was the only way I was able to travel. You know, I could not get on a plane and go to the US, the books that I was reading from there, or come to Britain, the books that I was reading from here, or to Russia, the books that I had been reading from there, or South America. I was able to travel lying back on my bed or sitting in a chair somewhere and just go into these worlds and discover people and discover cultures and find out so much more. So I always write that in mind, that readers come to my book to travel into my world. And at the moment I am reading Marlon James, Black Leopard, Red Wolf.
Great.
He is sublime, this guy, and he tells a story in this novel. He writes a novel, but he's telling stories and of this world that he has drawn out of Eyre, and I find it incredibly. And I don't want it to end. Thankfully, it's such a huge book. I have also got, I haven't finished The Shadow King by Maaza Mengistu. And indeed, I recommend people to read The Old Drift by Namwali. I mean, this girl, she takes you places. It's as if African women are taking the novel and doing things with it, because the novel is a cultural product. And when the novel travels from Europe and comes to Africa, it's not going to be the same novel as Jane Eyre wrote. It's going to be a very different novel because it's talking about a very different culture. And Namwali does this fantastically because she is writing about the history of Zambia, but she's going to take you to Europe first. She's not going to look at the colonizer when he arrives in Zambia. She will take you back where the colonizer come from and why he's leaving, and then look at him when he arrives and look at his ancestors he's left behind. And the book starts as a historical novel, then it becomes a novel talking about reality, and then it becomes futuristic, and it's not the kind of book you can put in a box. And I recommend that as well.
You're so generous. Well, that's all we have time for. Here you have Jennifer on reading, creating, and writing as a way of taking people to another world. In a moment, we're going to say goodbye to Jennifer, but do visit our independent online bookshop and buy her books and tell your friends to buy them too. Believe me, buying a book is the nicest thing you can possibly do for an author. So go to shop.edbookfest.co.uk. This year's festival is free of charge to everyone, and it's been made possible by the generosity of supporters and donors. If you've enjoyed this event with Jennifer, we'd love you to consider making a donation to the Edinburgh International Book Festival so they can continue their great work of putting on events for as many people as possible. Thank you for joining us. And Jennifer, thank you for giving us an amazing hour of your time.
Thank you for hosting me, and thank you, Edinburgh Festival, for having me again. This is a wonderful platform.